Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome and thank you for joining us on our third day of talks, panels and discussions as part of Tomorrow Today. I'm Michael Hoare, an independent consultant, and I've been working on this project with Severn Arts as project manager. Produced by the Arches Festivals team at Severn Arts, this is a 3-day online programme exploring practical advice and guidance on what festival organisers will need to consider when staging outdoor events, as well as considering today what the relationship is between festivals, communities and placemaking post-COVID. In January 2019, Worcester was one of 5 cities awarded cultural development funding from the DCMS, with the aim of unlocking the city's creative and economic growth and placing culture at the heart of regeneration and economic development. The project has 4 strands: restoring 8 Victorian railway arches into creative industry spaces, a skills development programme to encourage young people to stay in the city, a destination management plan and an ambitious festivals programme. The festivals programme is managed and produced through Severn Arts. Severn Arts is a thriving charitable arts company based here in Worcester, bringing high quality music and arts across the county through innovative partnership working. You can find more out about Severn Arts and the Arches Festivals Worcester online at severnarts.org.uk. Now, the next session is a panel discussion focusing on the relationship between festivals and local communities and how that might change as a consequence of COVID. The panel discussion, as I think you all know in the audience, is a response to the keynote speeches this morning. It's a kind of companion session, if you like. There was an electrifying discussion this morning, I thought, and I hope we can kind of pick up on some of those themes in the panel. But first, a little bit of housekeeping. Laura, you can see, who is already interpreting the session. If you want to have closed captions, please just click the CC button at the bottom of your screen. And if you want to introduce yourself and your organisation, if you're part of one, please feel free to let us know and say hello in the chat function at the bottom of the screen. We'll be taking questions at the end of the session, so please direct questions for this session to the Q&A box, and you can make it anonymous if you wish, or you can tell us who you are. So let's get started. I'm going to introduce the panel one by one. I'm just going to say their name and their organisation. Their biographies will appear on screen if you want to find out more about them. First of all, I'm going to say hello to Andrew Loretto, Hat Fair Director in Winchester and freelance theatre maker. Hi, Andrew. Great to see you. I'm also going to introduce Maggie Clarke, who is Director of XTRAX and Manager of Without Walls. Hi, Maggie. Next, I'm going to introduce Paul Bristow, who's National Director of Strategic Partnerships at Arts Council. Paul, fantastic. Hello. And also, you will also know David Edmunds. I'm going to introduce him now, Festivals Director at Severn Arts. Hello, David.
Hello, everyone.
Brilliant. Okay, so I think everybody had a chance to look at the keynote provocations this morning, and it was, as I said already, I think you'll agree, some parts of it were quite an electrifying sort of provocation and discussion. So I'd like to build on some of those themes and find out what your views are about some of those things that were picked up on in the sessions this morning. So my first question, I'm going to direct it towards Andrew, because I know it's a topic close to his heart. Andrew, is this a moment, do you think, for a much more radical approach to working with communities?
So my personal take, and really I'm speaking from the heart and personally today, so partly in my role as Hat Fair Director, currently furloughed, but just really as a practitioner across the UK and Europe over the last 25 years. And for me, community and place and space and co-authoring with communities has been at the heart of my practice ever since I started. And I've been trying to figure out why that is, and I think it's partly because of me growing up in Northern Ireland during the Troubles, and quite often working outdoors was problematic during my childhood. And so I've been really interested in how we bring people together and through empathy and joy in the outdoors. So that's always been at the heart of practice. But sometimes I have found myself, and quite often I find myself fighting the institutions from inside, fighting the theatre industry. There have been moments when institutions have said, let's open up, let's co-author, let's do work outdoors, let's work with communities. And then when that work becomes successful and grows ahead of steam, they get a bit scared because they're losing control and they want to sort of shut down again. Now, I think we've got a really exciting moment here where this work, and those of us who've been doing this work for years and believe in this work, we can really seize the day and move forward with our communities, creating transformative projects. So I think there's a realization and an understanding around the value of this work.
So I saw a lot of nods there on the screen. Maggie, would you like to come in on that?
Yeah, I think it's really great hearing what Andrew just commented there. And I suppose my take on it regarding COVID is obviously it is of course a moment for radical transformation, because our lives have been turned upside down. You know, I think, you know, a year ago none of us could have imagined that we would be sitting all in our own separate places having a webinar like this, and yet for many people I think, you know, the digital platform has become our kind of, you know, our natural form of communication, and anyone that did have any resistance to it no longer does, because it is the only way we've been able to kind of keep going. But I think when I think about what's happened, you know, with COVID, and, you know, that there's so many different angles on it, aren't there? There's the absolute, you know, tragedy of the reality through a pandemic, and, you know, let's be honest, we are still living through it. I'm in Manchester right now and we're still in a kind of semi-lockdown situation, and, you know, waiting to find out whether Oldham is going to be in a full lockdown, you know, so it's clearly ongoing. But I think the other things that for me have really happened are, you know, the big takeaways for me are, you know, this has been a moment where we look at things like, you know, Black Lives Matter has happened in the middle of all of this, and I think, you know, having that, giving visibility to the sort of Black and Asian and kind of, you know, minority ethnic artists and communities, and, you know, and the fact that the way that they have taken to the streets, into the public space in order to kind of make their voices heard is one part of it. I think also looking at actually how we have had, that COVID is forcing us to question our approach to transport and travel, and how we usually conduct our interactions. So there's a big focus on the climate emergency, and I think many of us are kind of, you know, are kind of really recognizing that our usual ways of working and touring are different. And in terms of how that relates to festivals and street arts and outdoor arts, it makes me think of, you know, how the tool of the Extinction Rebellion movement has been, you know, creative tools that we all recognize within the outdoor arts and festivals cultural industry, if you want to call it that. So I think, you know, yes, there's a moment to grasp here if we're creative and clever, and, you know, sort of to hold on to in terms of how, you know, communities have always been at the heart of what festivals do. You know, I think that's one of the reasons that I work in this sector is because of the way that you have this sometimes seamless blend between the artist and the audience. And for me, that is very exciting. So I really do think there is something that we can capture here by way of radical development.
David, are you ready for some radical action in this area?
It's really interesting, isn't it? I think that, you know, one of the thoughts around as we were putting this together was that, you know, I kept hearing this word community endlessly in so many sort of different walks of life, and whether that meant the sort of, you know, the Thursday night round of applause for NHS and key workers, whether that meant sort of, you know, spending more time talking to your neighbours, and how that's changed. And I was mindful to say we're constantly this word's being used, and I know practitioners and artists and people like Andrew that have worked in community and community arts for a long time, and it suddenly feels like, yes, there is a moment for us to say, oh, we're front and centre for some of this, and that could be an opportunity. I think there's, even from this morning's debate, there's some kind of conversation about what do we mean by community. I'll be completely honest, I think there's a lot of misconception about what do we mean by that? What do we mean by co-authorship? What do we mean by producing work with communities? And where does that fit? What's the voice of an artist? There's so many things that just kind of make me ponder on that. I think there's a danger that if we don't kind of get our ducks in a line and kind of plan how we want to move forward, that everything just becomes outdoors. And for me, the beauty of some of the stuff Maggie's talked about is that the work and the artists we work with who specialise in this field and have been specialising in it for a very long time, there's a skill set and a way of working and a way of moving an audience physically around a space, a way you engage with an audience in a city centre where the work just pops up. And that's not the same for me as, you know, taking Romeo and Juliet and shoving it outside and going, look, outdoor arts. So I think, you know, there's some real opportunities, and that's exciting. But also I think that, you know, there could become a danger like, oh, we're just going to move everything outdoors. And that's not what the sector is for me. It's not just theatre work that could be outdoors. It's something very different. So I've probably got more questions than answers right now, but I kind of find that exciting as well, that we don't know.
That's really interesting. Paul, what do you think? Do you think the sector and places are ready for more radical approaches from us? Do you think?
I think some places are, and I think some parts of the sector are. I don't think that everybody is for a variety of reasons, and we need to think about how those places that are ready and have been doing some interesting stuff for a while, both places and you know, practitioners, are able to support in a collegiate and you know, positive way those that can't, because I think we're at a point now where we don't get a choice over the radicalism, actually, and I think that, you know, we're going to have to find a way to move forward, to recognise that there are differences in expertise and practice within our sector, and that will need to be overcome if there is to be benefit for all, but also recognising that benefit for all question has come into an absolutely sharp focus now through COVID. And I think Maggie's point about BLM having happened at the same moment, I mean, it is no coincidence, and it is shining a light on a set of inequalities and a state of unfairness that we can see, you know, showing sharp relief in other parts of our lives as well. So I think, you know, what we're talking about here, in particular art forms and ways of working we're talking about here, are very valuable to place and to people's lives in their places. I think COVID is showing up many of the stark differences between places and the chances and opportunities that are denied to some people just because of where they live. So I think there's something there about why we need to be radical, which the pandemic has thrown up, and then that comes back to the challenge of how as well, because it's not just a question of social distancing and whether particular art forms are more appropriate to, you know, a world in which you've got a virus circulating. It's about whether, you know, cultural practice and cultural practices and practitioners are working in the right way to deal with some of those challenges that have been thrown up over the last few months. And I think what we can say in terms of the inequalities that are very stark, both within, you know, those who work within and those who consume in our sector, but also within our country, between people from different backgrounds and different locations, means that if we are to be radical in how we serve communities and work with and alongside communities, and I absolutely agree with David's point that, you know, big question about what working with and communities means within the context that we're coming into. It can't be business as usual. We're going to have to change because of the reasons of inequity and inequality, but also the ways of working don't stack up as they used to.
That's really, my next question is going to build on this, really, because can't be business as usual. And this whole idea of, are we ready? Is our cultural practice ready? I've got a question. I suppose I might field this at David, actually, to start with. I know David's only just spoken, which is, does the sector really understand? Is there a consistent understanding of this notion of co-authorship and working with communities? Rebecca talked about some of the features of those practices this morning, but is there a consistent understanding there?
No. I think it's the simple answer. I think it's complicated, and I think that, you know, there's a danger. You know, I was just trying to hint at kind of just going, oh, we're going to work with communities more, and we're going to work in, you know, places that aren't cities more, and you know, and I think there's nothing worse than sort of, you know, work being done to people. So it's kind of, you know, you take that and it's kind of, you know, parachuted in and it's sledgehammered. And it's like, yeah, we were working with communities. I think those that understand the practice and have spent a long time developing that ways of working, that methodology, that understanding, and whether that be, you know, that, so on one hand is that you're making a show that is co-authored and the content of that work is being made through community stories, but there's an artist or a practitioner pulling those stories together. Is it kind of like the project that Helen Marriage was talking about this morning in Derry, and the political resonance of that and how they steered that? Is it a community choosing their programming? And as you see with some of the CPP projects, so I think it's multi-layered, and they say there's a danger of a one-size-fits-all approach. So I think our sector, outdoor arts, if that's where we're kind of sort of talking, and festivals, does understand that to quite a large degree, and has, as Maggie said, worked with communities and been for those communities, and that will broaden. Does the arts and culture sector understand what that means? I don't think so, no, not yet.
Andrew, you looked very animated when I asked that question. This is multi-layered. What's your take on this?
So interesting reflecting on some of the debate this morning about what co-authorship and working with communities means, and actually I identify with many sides of the argument. So there have been times when I've been the artist, and I've come up with a broad vision for a project, but within the structure of that project enables freedom and challenge to the co-authors and myself. And I think that is the key, is whatever the model is, that the artist places themselves at the same level as all of the co-authors, the community participants. So you're challenging, encouraging, expanding each other's horizons. Equally, I've got experience through, say, Doncaster and Creative People and Places of that whole sort of long, careful, quite tricky sometimes, challenging, but ultimately incredibly rewarding work, where you work over a long period of time with small groups of people. It's very delicate, it's very careful work. You're more than an artist, you're becoming part of the family, you're becoming part of the fabric of that community, that city, that region, and you're forming a very special bond with those communities, which has to be nurtured and can be and like any family, there can be disagreements and falling outs, and all of that is valid, but ultimately it's an incredibly rewarding process. So for me, there are many ways in, as David has said, which were reflected this morning, but it's long, it's careful, it's definitely not about beaming in like a UFO and going ta-da, and then off we go again. It is absolutely about the fabric of a city, a region, a society, working really carefully with multiple partners. And in my head, when I run a festival, I'm coming at it with the viewpoint of an artist, the viewpoint of a curator, the viewpoint of a local citizen who actually wants to have a great life wherever I live. And it's all about, for me, it's like the dramaturgy of a city. It's the dramaturgy of a region. It's knitting together all the different elements from local communities, businesses, local government, etc., to kind of make this the best life we possibly can at this moment in time.
David wants to reply to the response.
Yeah, just a really quick point. I think it's really interesting that I think we're going to have to wait and see what the changes are. So I heard a news report this morning that cricket, as in the sport, they're looking like they're going to have to abolish their afternoon tea, because there was a big break because of rain, and then it's like they played for 10 minutes and then they went for tea. And the response was that those people now going to the cricket aren't prepared to tolerate that anymore. And I think that's interesting, where we start to go, audience going, because of what we've been through the lockdown and the pandemic, where are our tolerances? What are we happy to wait for, not wait for? What happened previously that we went, oh, that's okay. Whereas now we're like, no, I'm not prepared to work that way. I'm not prepared to sit and watch 10 minutes of sport and then wait an hour while you have tea. So it struck me as going, actually, we're assuming some models that existed, back in February, March, and we've not tested those yet to see what those communities and those places, do they want to do? How do they want to work? Have they got less time, more time? Are they more patient, less patient? And it just struck me that's going to be really interesting how that plays out. Yeah.
So we had a question already from an audience member, and it relates to this part of the discussion. So I'm going to pose it because I think that would be really nice. So it's a bit of a nuanced question as well. Where is the line between co-authorship between community and artists and empowering your communities to feel ownership when it comes to creating work? Is it important to draw a line to say the quality of the work is being affected by co-authorship too much? Where would that line be? And is quality important in that sense?
Yeah, quality is really important. Quality of process and quality of output. Believe you me, as far as I'm concerned, I am not compromising quality of work, of artistic output. I proudly call myself an artist, however you define that, as a producer, as a writer, as a dramaturg, as a festival director, and actually, I am artistically driven, and I want to share that process and with our communities, and we challenge each other to achieve the highest possible results for that particular project. Now, also the other thing is, if you're going to genuinely open doors and genuinely create opportunities, people have got to start somewhere. People have got to have a way in. People have got to train, learn, be nurtured. And so, it is taking a risk. And this was talked about this morning. You do quite often find yourself embarking on projects where you can't be entirely certain of the outcome, but my God, we're gonna try and go there. I have a philosophy myself as a maker that if there isn't a healthy proportion of manageable risk attached to a project, is it actually worth doing? So you don't want things to fail, but my God, no, we're not compromising quality. So there's not an easy answer to that question. It's lots of checks and balances, and again, artists are in there, and experienced artists are in there, and that experience, I think, helps everybody get there, hopefully.
I've got going to move on to my next question now. I think it's going to be particularly interesting for Maggie, first of all, and perhaps for Paul as well. Is large scale even possible now? I mean, Helen was talking this morning about some of her projects. It's quite clear she's committed to large scale. Is it possible now, Maggie?
Crikey, that's the question everyone's asking themselves at the moment, isn't it? I mean, I suppose it feels to me like we're in a very fluid situation, and I think there are clear challenges around trying to present anything of a large, a really large scale. At the moment, in the current context, certainly in Manchester, we wouldn't be able to do that. And I think presenting anything really large scale at the moment clearly has its challenges, but I think clearly this is an evolving situation, and the news is at the moment, I would say it does feel like the news is feeling fairly positive around the possibility of a vaccine and or an efficient testing mechanism. And once that's in place, then of course we can start imagining going back to something that looks a little bit more like what we are familiar with in terms of large scale. But I think so I'm certainly optimistic about it, and I also think there's a huge public appetite for being able to have events that do bring people together in the way that we are all familiar with. But clearly, that has to be done in a way that everybody, that it's not just safe, but the public can clearly see as safe. And I think, so yes, I think it is possible, but I think that, let's not hide from the fact that there are very, very clear risks to the development of large scale work at the moment. It would be naive to say anything differently. And I say that as someone who's got it from a number of different perspectives. Through the work that we're doing with Without Walls, we have a number of large scale projects that we're trying to develop at the moment. But they will only be realistic if the artists are confident that they can work in a way that that is safe, for them and their teams. If they feel comfortable if they believe that they can actually make it work financially, because the way that we are working with all of the artists is they are independent producers of their own projects with the support of ourselves and a number of other institutions and commissioners. And the whole, let's be honest, creating very large scale work is usually very expensive, and a lot of people have lost their budgets. A lot of the partners that we work with are linked to venues, and if they can't do their Christmas shows or pantomimes, then they're at severe financial risk. We know what's going on in the arts and cultural world. So I think, yes, it's possible. Yes, we have to be brave and be optimistic and kind of plan ahead for that. But timing is everything. And the other thing I was going to say is that I'm in discussion about working on another really big, large scale international team, big scale piece of work. We had a meeting yesterday morning with amazing director based in Australia, who we're hoping to work with and kind of try to create something really large, really big scale that would hopefully tour the world. And I think, is the time right to do something like that? I mean, my feeling about it is I really don't know, but I'm happy to try, and I think if we can satisfy ourselves that if we can satisfy ourselves that we can do it safely, that we can do it in a way that is responsible within the context of the climate emergency, and that we can actually raise the funds that's needed, then I think, yes, we're going to push on. And so that is a live conversation that I will continue to have, as we will do with, I know many other artists that are developing large scale work, but they are all having to themselves the same questions. I suppose what I would say is that I just think that the public appetite, what we love about those big scale events, whether that be a kind of, fireworks display or a kind of an amazing piece of theatre, audiences want to see that work, and artists want to create and present it. At the moment, the thing that we've got to square is how we can bring the audiences and everyone together financially viable, because that is a problem. So I haven't answered the question. I've just said some of the problems. Sorry about that.
Paul, could we come to you? What about, how does that sit in this? There's a tension, isn't there, between everything's being pulled towards the local and the 15-minute city and so on. How's it going to fit together?
It's a really interesting question, and there was lots that you said there, Maggie, that's given me pause for thoughts. All the notes I've taken, I've been scribbling through and changing my mind as you were speaking. So should have gone first and had myself contradicted. But I think that clearly the question now is there is an emphasis on the local. And that's largely because large-scale work right now isn't possible in the way that we've previously understood it, for all the reasons that we know about are largely associated with public health. I do think that as Maggie has said, that appetite for people to participate and engage and be part of something bigger than themselves again is there, and the point made about the Thursday night praise and applause for NHS and key workers just shows people want to be part of something bigger than themselves. What I would counsel is back to this thing again, that COVID is changing all the rules of the game in ways we probably don't quite understand yet. And it might be that we get a vaccine and we go back to things relatively quickly. It might be that what this has done is prepare us for future pandemics and challenges around climate change and anything else that allows us and large-scale events and other cultural ways of living to be more resilient to those shocks. But I think back to the specific one now, I think it's not an either-or question between the local and the large scale. I think that the local has its place, but that appetite will still remain there, and it will bring value to the local. Let's not forget as well. I think again to how people might change their own behaviours in the wake of the pandemic. Now, my mum loves this sort of stuff. She thinks it's great, but she spent all of this year shielding. She's not really going to be one around loads of people in the way that she was at Christmas. And you think about people with disabilities who may have been shielding as well as elderly people. We don't want to charge towards something now that may exclude them, and we have to think about how people's lives have changed within the context of this. I think as well there is that sense that what might give people confidence to come back together will be the other parts of their lives. So that really live debate at the moment about how and when schools come back. These sorts of things will impact on how people think about their engagement with other people, and some of those debates will shadow and copy some of the things that we're thinking about, and maybe a few steps ahead of us. But they will certainly be informing how our audiences approach this stuff. And maybe the whole question of what is large scale shifts as well. Maybe it's not between the large and the local. Maybe it's the large thing that you experience locally. Because when we're at our doorsteps clapping, so were people hundreds of miles away. Is the large scale a different thing to what we thought it was before?
Yes, good. Andrew, I think just a comment from you and then from David, and we'll move on to the next question.
Yeah, just again, taking on board everything that's been said, what Maggie was saying about the sheer practicalities of making large-scale work at the moment, but let's assume we can work that through. There is a line of thinking in the current situation that actually, if we do really large-scale, something that you can view from a distance across a city or an area, then maybe this is a great time to do that.
David?
Yeah, it was really interesting. The session we had yesterday with event managers and production managers and the stuff we've gone through today, it just reminds me just how clever our sector is and how we are full of people that problem solve and actually love problem solving. So that, you know, that large scale, as Paul said, what do we mean by that now? And is that about the size of the work, or are we saying it's the size of the audience? Clearly we can't put 10,000 people shoulder to shoulder at the minute, but there are ways you could spread that work across the city. You could still do large scale, and working with artists and really brilliant event managers and production managers to problem solve, and right, what are we trying to do? How can we make this happen? Is going to be really interesting, and does make me feel reassured that we can still deliver in a different way. I think in the shorter term, and I'm with Maggie, I hope longer term we can get back to all the things that we love doing at that scale. I think in the shorter term, the reality is that resource and budget is going to be a huge factor for people. That part of the conversation yesterday was that you're now probably looking at least 50% of your budget being spent on event infrastructure. And I think if you've got that resource and you can do barriers, you can do holding areas, you can do sanitized stations, you can deliver to a number of people. If you haven't got that in place over the next 6 to 12 months, say that's going to be a bigger challenge. And so I think, you know, we've got to see, is it that if you've got the resource, you can put stuff on at a certain scale with maybe less numbers. But if you haven't, that's going to be much more challenging. So I think it will be interesting. But I think, say, that the skills and the stuff that was coming out yesterday from people going, well, we can do it like that, or what about this? And we're learning new ways all the time, is encouraging. And our sector is brilliant at managing people and moving people around. So I feel pretty confident we will find ways. But I think we have to not try and, in the short term, compare it to what was. That's kind of gone, and we've been through this. It's what can we do now, and how can we do it? And we work with artists and producers to kind of help make that stuff happen.
That's great, David. And I should just add that if you want to hear anything about those kind of creative ideas that event managers and producers who spoke on the last 2 days are pursuing in relation to areas like health and safety, we've got recordings of those sessions from the last 2 days. So just be in contact with us and we can let you have those. Okay, thanks for those really lively answers. It was really great, thank you. I'm going to move on to the next question. So I get the sense that I've heard little kind of whisperings, almost like people kind of licking their lips thinking, wow, maybe this is the moment for outdoor arts, you know, maybe this is the moment, because is it possible more now than ever? So do we think that outdoor arts is going to get leaned on more heavily than before? What's the view? Rebecca was asked a question about this, I think, this morning. So I direct that to Andrew, I think, first of all.
I think within the outdoor art sector, there's been very lively ongoing debates throughout the whole lockdown period, you know, through organisations like XTRAX and Outdoor Arts UK and ISACs, and indeed this week, etc., about, you know, how can we, you know, sort of seize this opportunity. But I would also reflect back to what David said earlier. I think there is also a danger that traditional venue-based ways of making theatre, and I'm not disparaging that work, okay, that's great, and I've been involved with that work myself, you know, but there is a danger that venues that currently are not able to function are thinking, great, let's do outdoor work for 6 months and then we'll go back to the way we were. And David mentioned the model of, well, let's just move Romeo and Juliet outdoors, and I do think there is a real danger around that. And actually, when we talk about outdoor arts, we are talking about a particular form of work and aesthetic that has been developed over many, many years, is informed by so many different physical and artistic disciplines, that is absolutely specialist in terms of how it functions, how it understands and works with audiences, which it'll have to reevaluate now, and how it works with place and space. So yes, there is an opportunity, but also I'm personally quite excited about exploring opportunities to bring outdoor artists together with indoor expertise. So for example, what if you bring brilliant playwrights who work for indoor work together with circus dance makers? What is that product? We've got a really exciting artistic opportunity here, and I've been having some of those conversations here in Winchester, because we're part of Play to the Crowd, so we're also attached to a theatre venue, Theatre Royal Winchester. And you know, what is the Christmas show, for example, that could be outdoors, that brings together expertise from the panto sector with circus artists, dancers, people who specialise in outdoor work? Let's explore.
Maggie, I'd love to ask you this question, really, pose it to you, because you work with so many festivals in your networks and in the Without Wall networks and internationally. What is this the moment for outdoor arts? Is it going to get leaned on more heavily?
I think it depends what we mean by leaned on. I mean, I think it's brilliant that, you know, I'm up for having conversations with any of the venues or any of the artists that want to think about bringing their work into outdoor spaces, because you're right, a lot of us have we have a lot of experience of doing that, and you know, we can help people kind of fast track them through some of the opportunities and the pitfalls of working in outdoor spaces. So yes, I think, you know, absolutely. And I also think, you know, there's, I think whilst I'm, you know, very proud to be part of what some people would call the outdoor art sector or the street art sector, I also think it's hugely problematic. How do we possibly define a sector, you know, that encompasses so much? So, and I also think that, you know, whilst what Andrew says is true, that there's a lot of artistic, there is an artistic culture that is defined by many, that many artists and kind of festivals will associate themselves with. I think it's really timely to have a look at what the, you know, aesthetics we want to hold in what we call this sector, and is it time for a kind of, you know, a big reimagining of you know, and many of the outdoor festivals in the UK are informed by a kind of European street arts aesthetic, and I think that's brilliant and I love it and I want to continue to see it and be part of it. But there are, you know, there's a lot of other aesthetics that I think we need to bring into our world as well. So I think that it's good to reflect on what we mean by a sector or an aesthetic that is operating in the outdoor arts world, and kind of look at how, you know, maybe bringing other people in who otherwise might not have considered it. I'm all for it. I just think bring it on, and if that means that we're gonna have an evolution of what we understand by the genre and the art form and the kind of work that we see in outdoor spaces, then I think that's a brilliant thing, and ultimately a brilliant thing for audiences, most importantly, because audiences should be at the heart of what we do, but also a brilliant thing for the evolution of the work, you know. So I'm very positive about all of that.
Really interesting way of looking at it, Maggie. Paul, what's your take on this? Because, you know, as a place specialist, a lot of places, they don't have a traditional cultural physical infrastructure, but they will have parks, they'll have town squares, they'll have village squares, playing fields. How do you see this?
It's a really interesting question, and I think that if we just said stuff inside is difficult, so outdoor arts moment has come, we're absolutely asking the wrong question here. I think it's standing back and looking not just where we are in this moment of this specific moment, but where we've got to from, you know, a number of elements that have got us to here. And I think some of the things that are tending to give opportunities to the outdoor arts, let's call it the outdoor arts opportunity rather than the sector, let's call it opportunity, that I think have been constant and will continue. So where are the places that people can come together and be with each other to do positive things together? It's interesting how the high streets debate, as you know, it went from oh my goodness, how are we going to save retail? Got to get people on the high street. Let's do some art on the high street. They'll come to the high street and then they'll do some shopping. Has shifted quite significantly, actually, and it's shifted into a place which I think presents lots of opportunities for us. So it's shifted to a place where you hear lots of people in town centres and high streets saying things like, well, actually, if people aren't mixing on the high street for retail purposes, where are they mixing? And actually, are there more positive and you know, more positive ways for people to engage and mix with each other in place? And that's I think that's a really productive and positive place for us as the cultural sector to end up. That's not just about some adjunct of bringing people in to do a bit of shopping. So I think that the moment isn't just that, you know, we can't do anything indoors anymore. There's some specific things that our sector offers around outdoor arts that answer some really deep community and social challenges. And I think that we should be out there front and center saying, yeah, we want people to have more opportunities. We want people to have who've been excluded from cultural opportunity in the past to have those cultural opportunities. And we recognise the value that culture can bring to people's lives in the places in which they live. And that seems to me the thing that we can talk about here. I think this sense that you know, it's only about, you know, High Street Regen, and it's only about the COVID moment. And I know that's not what colleagues are saying, but I'm pretty optimistic about where we can find our place, both in those kind of debates, but also in the difference we can make to people's lives.
Yeah, really interesting. David, are you optimistic? I think I know you are.
Yeah, I think, you know, you have to be. I think it's Maggie's point just really landed with me, and I thought it was really interesting because I think, you know, already where with a programming hat on, where I'd maybe go and find work, you know, the last 2 months, I would have normally been out at loads of other festivals across the UK and Europe, seeing work, seeing companies, and you build a bit of a shopping list and you go, yeah, that'll work with the audience, or that does the job I want it to. And we're not doing that. So we're talking to artists in different ways, or maybe artists we wouldn't talk to because they weren't given that platform. So there's a bit of kind of sort of readjusting about what the tried and tested ways of us finding work or interesting voices, that there's a moment here of sort of a reboot. So that's really interesting, while being, you know, slightly unnerving as well, because you go, well, this is my process and I know it works. And I know if I go to Freya Torrega, I'm going to kind of find X and that will do the job I want that to do. So to kind of move that away and think about next summer now in terms of our programme, specifically for Worcester, I'm like, right, how do we want to build that programme? So that's exciting while challenging as well. So I think, you know, there is optimism for me. I think it's how long is it going to take? I think people have missed, as we know from everything this week and other conversations, that live moments, that being connected, everything that outdoor opportunities can give you in those moments. So I think we will get back to something where those moments matter and are more frequent. When we will get there, I think, is part of the question, and how and what. It's kind of like you turn the volume level up really loud, and at some point it's got to settle back down. And I'm really intrigued to what level are we going to settle on, and how long before we get to that point. So I think we're naturally optimistic. When you do outdoor arts, you have to be optimistic. You deal with the UK weather, you deal with, you know, all sorts of stuff. It's not for the faint-hearted to put this stuff on. So you naturally have to have a bit of an optimistic tendency, and right, how can we make this happen? So I do share the optimism. Just how long is it going to take us to get there? No one's making new work at the minute. So that's, again, another interesting thing. It's like, so are we going to revisit work? Now that's really interested in a throwaway culture where we throw everything away, and we do that a lot with our work because we've got to make the next piece of work. Well, are we going to go and revisit things? That's, again, an interesting debate of audiences not experience that piece of work. So I think there's lots of opportunity.
Really interesting. I'm going to start to ask you to think a little bit about place a little bit more. Something that Stephen Millington this morning was talking about. He was very much talking about how places are changing and might change. And I suppose I'm going to ask you, perhaps I'll ask Paul and Andrew first, because I know you're kind of keen on this area. So he was talking particularly about things like Monday becoming the new Saturday in towns and so on, because people don't have to shop at weekends because they're at home during the week. Or things becoming very local. You know, the French mayoral candidate who was elected on the 15-minute city, who was built her campaign on the 15-minute city idea. People staying very local, shopping locally, not travelling very far. What does that mean for the making of this kind of work, do you think? Shall I start with Andrew first and then come to Paul?
Yeah, look, I mean, we've been undertaking work like this here in Winchester over the last few years, and if anything, the current situation, I think, is going to accelerate the journey we've already been on about making work not just at weekends but at other points during the week to work with the rhythms of the city and work with the rhythms of our local population. So the example I would give is our Woolly Hat Fair, which we've occasionally done over and above the Summer Hat Fair, and in 17, we actually worked in very close partnership with local businesses. We worked with playwright Richard Herford, who I think is possibly in the room today, and a visual artist and a rep team of actors. And for example, we worked with like a local solicitors firm, a local building society, taking it completely beyond a traditional sponsor artist relationship, where we actually created work with them and physically on their premises. And they were kind of like just little minted jewels, 15, 20-minute long pieces of immersive theatre for small audience groups. And I think that sort of work, which is very localized, and you won't hear about it outside of Winchester, you know what I mean? It's very localized, but it's low tech, big impact locally, and is really developing our mutual relationships across the city. And so for us here in Winchester moving forward, I think we're going to be doing a lot more of that. And we've got a great relationship with the local BID and with local community groups, but there are many groups and organisations we're not working with at the moment. So I think we need to double down and really reach out and sort of explore what those options might be across shared placemaking agendas. Because the other thing is everybody's broke now as well. There's a harsh reality. Local authorities are broke. Businesses are, in a lot of trouble as well, etc. So we need to all say, this is what I can bring to the table. And again, it's about artists working with other people's agendas. It's not always about our agendas. And you can make brilliant work working with other people's agendas as well. And that can be incredibly satisfying. So yeah.
Really interesting. Paul, I'll just bring something in that Rebecca said earlier on. She was talking about this potential iterative move to funding, but by place. Is that going to be really important, do you think, for festivals to start thinking about, and festivals and outdoor arts kind of companies?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think, and Rebecca and I completely on message. Our new strategy, we're really, we're making a real commitment to working to develop cultural opportunity in place. And, I've talked a lot about inequalities, their experience spatially. The opportunities can be experienced spatially and developed spatially as well, and that's how we tackle the challenges and get things better. So we're absolutely committed to that. Yes, that strategy was published before COVID. We're remaining completely committed to that approach. So we're looking at how we fund. We're looking at how we work alongside other funders. I think Andrew's point there about all the local authorities being broke is really, really important. I cannot praise local. I know everybody will have their problems with regulation departments and licensing and planning or whatever. But I think since 2008, since the crash, the way that local government in this country has continued to support culture, even while being in huge problems with the budgets, which we've seen again in stark relief now. And I think it's about thinking about how those people that we might have seen previously as funders, what's the other ways in which they can support us. So licensing, regulation, planning, outdoor arts, hugely important to those things. How can we work with licensing professionals? What's their professional bodies? How can we work with them so that they can be our friends and our facilitators? And I think there's a really important thing there. I think, however, when we talk about this ambition for place, and I don't want to get all Cassandra on everybody, but I'm about to. There is that thing about there's the ambition, and it's laudable, and what I do in the day job, and Stephen talks very persuasively in a number of places about how things are changing. But those ambitions don't yet match up to the places that we live. I mean, Maggie, you were talking about transport before and how that affects people's ability to engage. I don't think public transport in the UK at the moment, even without a pandemic, allows us to have anything that looks like a 15-minute city. And even there, I think the ambitions of Anne Hidalgo around Paris being a 15-minute city, it's great until you think of all the banlieue around Paris, let alone the provincial towns from which all the Gilets jaunes are coming in to riot and smash things up. Paris is France is a country with big fractures around place and geography. And I think that just shows that where the ambitions are, our societies and places aren't yet. Now, clearly, we as the cultural sector can't solve those challenges. Other people will have to solve them. So we've got to work with them. But I think we can lead some of these changes as well. So how can we help people produce and consume culture within their places, or the places where they where they visit on their own terms. What does that mean physically? What does it mean culturally? What does it mean socially and economically in terms of the inequalities that might stand in their ways? These are all things which are very often within our gift, and many people working in our sector have a huge amount to offer. So let's start advocating, let's start setting out that vision for what place means for culture, and thinking about how we can be part of the change. But I think we've got to agree that it's going to be a change. It's not going to happen overnight. I think about what's happening around here. I'm sat in Southeast London at the moment, where lots of streets have been blocked off by the council to make it safer and more attractive for pedestrians and for cyclists. And that's happened over the last few weeks as a response to COVID, to encourage people out onto the streets and to get them outside. But what that's engendered is conflict. Lots of people don't like that happening. And we can't just go, you're wrong because there's a climate crisis and cards are bad. These people are citizens of this place as much as I am and my kids when we go out on our bikes. How do we negotiate the conflicts that necessarily come when you want to see change in a place? Because they will be there and they need to be negotiated. And some of those conflicts might end up being within our sector, between people who have different views of the sorts of practice that will make the difference. How do we manage that?
Really interesting. Maggie, what do you think about this shift to place-based working? What do you think it means for outdoor arts? I
don't know. I really don't know. But I do think that there's some things that were just talked about just then that do make me really concerned, in that I'm so aware, because of the inequality of distribution of wealth across our country, that I think there are some places who are probably very well able to respond to the opportunity that concept of place-based art making, that opportunity is something that some people can grasp and others I believe really cannot. And whilst I kind of think, I can't remember who it was that said to be so pleased with how local authorities are responding to this, and I would echo that in my limited experience of it. But I've also, some of the local authorities we're working with are dealing with huge problems, and arts and culture and putting on an event is absolutely the last thing they can possibly consider, because they're still figuring out how to deliver emergency services to vulnerable people. So I think it's I think we need to be aware of that, and if there is a move from a kind of structural or policy point of view from the Arts Council or whatever towards investing in place-based activity, then I think that inequality of the distribution of wealth and resource across the country and within local authorities needs acknowledging as a part of that, because I've seen some local authorities where all of the budget for that would normally have gone to arts and events and festivals has been redeployed, where staff themselves have been redeployed. So that is the first thing that comes to mind, and there's a challenge there evidently. On the other hand, if what we mean by this is that there's going to be a strong emphasis and a big move on making art and events that fits really well and integrates well into the specifics of a location and a community, then of course, that's amazing. And provided what we mean is that work is, provided we don't mean any kind of limitation of the opportunity, because actually what we would want to see is place-based work that also brings opportunity for audiences in that location to see something that they might not even know they want to see, So, but yeah, I think it sounds good, and I think if what we're talking about is in this revolution that we are all living through, there's a stronger opportunity for art to be placed very carefully in the best possible location for it and the people that live and work and in kind of occupy a local area, then that sounds like a good thing, I think.
David, I'm going to spin this question a little bit for you. Should we be stepping forward really proactively as outdoor arts organisations, festivals and organisers? Should we be stepping forward in places and offering our services and our roles and our ways of workings in this kind of post-COVID reconstruction kind of moment?
Yeah, but potentially, I think I'm mindful. It was just interesting listening to those conversations about place, and I think, you know, I don't feel qualified to kind of say an entire place should do all of this. It feels like that there are much smarter people than me can make decisions and recommendations on that. I think on the points we've just discussed, what is interesting is that one of our agendas in Worcester was about bringing work to Worcester audiences that they couldn't access in Worcester, that they would need to go to Birmingham or Bristol or London. And if the reflection post-COVID is going to be people wanting more where they live, and I know I found that I've explored where I live much more and feel much more connected with it as a place than I ever did anywhere I lived, because before it was just a bed and then I'd go to the office or wherever I was traveling next. I now feel this is where I actually live. If people are going to kind of want to embody that more, for me, that fuels the agenda I was trying to drive further forward, quicker. I think where the resource is kind of put for that will be interesting, as Maggie said, because if we're going to go local in that way, how do we make sure that resource is spread evenly in a way that it currently isn't? How is it that it isn't just in big cities? And I think we've really got to redefine what we mean by success and kind of success criteria. Is success, when you're looking at a regeneration project, about numbers, and is our evaluation and reporting mechanism about how many people turned up, how many people were there, how many people stayed and bought a coffee, or is it about quality of experience? And I think that will be an interesting shift, that if I bring a company like Ad Hoc or Kamchatka over from Europe to Worcester and put them in a small community somewhere, but that experience is life affirming and really resonates with that community, does that have the same value in terms of our reporting mechanisms as if we'd put them in Manchester or Bristol and there were thousands engaged? So I think we're going to need to redefine that, and I think funders will need to maybe look at how that's distributed. So I think we've got lots of skills in the sector that can be of benefit, but I also think we know what we do, but as Maggie said, there's loads we don't know because nobody does. So we're kind of all making this up. So I think we can be part of a conversation, but I don't necessarily think it's for us as a sector to go, yeah, we've got all the answers, charge, follow us. I think we can be part of that, but we're not the solution for it all.
Andrew?
Just reflecting on what you've just said, David, reminds me of one of my experiences in Doncaster, with a project called Bowlby by the Sea, which was set up by artist Kate Sully, working with the local community there. And one year, with support from With Like Walls at XTRAX, we brought Gandini juggling to an ex-working man's club in Bowlby in Doncaster, and it was chosen by the local community. And this is a show that goes to major international festivals, and it was performing in Bowlby. It was quite an extraordinarily impactful thing. And the beauty, and I've witnessed that particular company also perform in other small contexts, and they loved that experience just as much as the big international outdoor festival. And I actually find with outdoor artists in general, they're in it because of the quality of the immediacy of the relationship with the audience. And whether it be a small audience in an emerging festival or an event in Doncaster, or whether it be an established international festival like Hat Fair or Fira Taraga, actually I find the performers sometimes even value the smaller, more intimate relationship more than that big massive crowd. They get a buzz from the big massive crowd, but they love the immediacy of the smaller audiences. So yes, how do you measure that?
I completely agree. I think it would just be interesting how we measure success going forward on that, because our matrix at the minute is very much at numbers and amount, and I think how you quantify that going forward, I think will maybe shift. I hope it will.
Really interesting. We haven't talked a lot about money. We talked a little bit about it because it sounds like it's going to be more expensive to do parts of the outdoor art activities. And I know, Andrew, you asked a question yesterday about will this mean less money for the artistic budget? But do we need to think about funding models differently? Will funding come from different routes in the future, and should we be looking for different routes? David, do you want to say something? You're nodding away at that.
Yeah, I think I'd probably defer to Paul to answer first on that one.
Yes, Paul.
I think the answer to that, or my answer to that, not the answer, that would be arrogant, but my answer to that would be that we should always, it's not just that we've arrived at this moment where we need to chase money because there's not any other sources of cash out there. And I think that as a funder, and we think about everything I was just saying about our approach to place, it's not just about going, right, it's Worcester this week, we'll put some money into Worcester this week. I think about the cultural development fund model that we've been working with, with lots of colleagues in Worcester and Wakefield here as well. I see in colleagues around the country. It's about working with partners in a place, and that's about how money works in a place. And it's about how it leverages in funding from other people, but also other people's time. I don't think we should ever underplay. I mean, I mentioned the point about, you might occasionally need some technical people like the licensing people to play ball, but sometimes you need that leadership and that convening, that soft kind of power that people within the place can bring, that might not be within the cultural sector or the cultural organisations or the artistic community. They might need to work in partnership with other people in the place to get hold of it. In fact, sometimes that's often the best way to work better with communities, to find the intermediaries that have the reach in and the legitimacy and the ability to talk to, maintain dialogues with. So I think there's something about funding enabling resources to be leveraged in. Some of that's going to be cash. Some of that's going to be other ways of working. I think the other thing that we're quite keen for our funding to do moving forward is that the government's interested in place, clearly. Levelling up means something, and it means the transfer, or not the transfer, but places that have not received as much funding or support from the public sector, getting more funding and more support from the public sector. Whether that means money's moved from place A to place B, or place B just gets more cash that's new, I'll let Rishi Sunak answer that one. I can't do that for him. But the ways in which government will do that will be place focused and quite significant. I think what we as a funder have got to do is to think about how our money might work alongside that sort of money to enable people within the location in the cultural sector to play a bit more of a game, to have a bit more of the capacity to say, right, there's several funding streams. The cultural sector, through money from the Arts Council or other places like the local authority, aren't just using this resource to create content. We're using it to create capacity and the ability to develop partnerships that allow us to be part of these bigger programs which are about transforming a place. And I think as a sector, we're pretty good at that already, actually. I think that the Cultural Development Fund activity shows that festivals are absolutely part of something that government wants to see in terms of transformation. So we shouldn't underplay the importance there. But I think it is worth saying that, I mean, I've been in several meetings lately where I think on this wall here, I need to take a big marker pen and draw a graph. And it's that one that's been in the papers recently, where GDP goes up like that, and then suddenly a couple of months ago you get the biggest recession since the Napoleonic Wars, and that's a fact, that there is going to be less cash around. So we also, alongside that, money is important, do need to be smarter in where we go to look for it.
Interesting. Now we've got time for two or three more questions from me, and then we've got some questions from the audience. But Maggie, I've got one for you here. So obviously a lot of plans have been cancelled this year, and I know that you work with a lot of festival directors. So how are festival directors working differently in this particular moment?
It's really tricky, isn't it? I mean, I think everyone's in it having to work on a very different timescale and in a very different way to the way they would normally have worked. So I think, I suppose the headlines for me are that, because of the uncertainty, it's stating the obvious, of course, but because of the uncertainty, people are not able to take programming decisions and artistic decisions in the same timetable, in the same timely way that they normally would. So many festivals that would normally have programmed their entire 2021 season are unable to do so, either because they don't know what their resources are going to be. They don't know whether they're going to have the money, from their local authority, from a box office, from a Christmas show, from whatever other, from sponsors, all of those different things. So they're having to, their hands are forced, they're having to wait before they make decisions. And additionally, you know, some of the issues around travel, and particularly those festivals. We work with many festivals that have a proudly international profile, and they're unable to make decisions around what international companies they may want to invite. And so whilst there may be somewhat more certainty around programming and making commitments to domestic, you know, sort of UK companies or companies from their local or regional area, and there's lots of, obviously that's a brilliant thing, you know, and hopefully creating a lot of opportunities for artists to build relationships with those kind of local presenting institutions if those relationships don't already exist. And that's something, by the way, that I think is happening all around the world. You know, the other international festivals that we're working with are all obviously faced with the same situation. So I think, yeah, I think those are the two headline things, really. Uncertainty about resources, and uncertainty about how you're able to, you know, sort of make decisions that are informed by travel. And I think the other thing is that, you know, there's real, you know, many people, we're all still learning about what does a COVID safe event look like, you know? I mean, one of our partners is Greenwich and Docklands International Festival in London, and I'm beyond excited to be going to see some live performance happening in outdoor spaces in a couple of weeks' time. So that's going to be really great. And but, you know, it's, you know, no doubt it's hugely different. So I think it's a combination of, you know, optimism for people who are waiting for, you know, something to hopefully, you know, hopefully there'll be a vaccine or a kind of, you know, something that will actually make it possible for us to program again and work again in what looks like a previously normal way, along with the caution, you know.
Yeah,
it's my observation.
Well, I've got a question. I'm not sure. I'm going to see who wants to bite on this one. So what do we need to do now to prepare for the future?
Think the unthinkable. I think that's what we have to do. I think that's somewhat, you know, we can't be, and yeah, we have to, but experimenting for experiment and sharing information with peers.
Maggie, we're losing you a bit there, Maggie. Would you repeat what you said at the beginning? I think you said, think the unthinkable, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll come back to you, Maggie. Andrew, what do you think we need to do now to prepare for this?
Yeah. So, like, I mean, the more I think about this, and in fact, my thinking's been prompted by attending some of the sessions this week. So thank you, Severn Arts, for putting it all together. You know, initially when I had to do that very painful thing of pulling apart an entirely put together international festival, because our brochure deadline was mid-March, it was all in place, and we were going to work with Severn Arts to bring a company over together and all of that, and initially, and still want to try and honour this, we wrote to all of the artists, whether it be local community artists, schools, international artists, saying we want you back next year. But of course now I realise the reality of that. We've moved on. I can't just replicate the exact festival I was going to do this year. Now I still want to honour my commitment to those artists, but it might be in different ways. It might be over a couple of years. It might be at different points in the year, not just the weekend of the festival. But what I've really realised is that together, us and audiences are going to have to take a bit of a collective, be a bit more tolerant of each other, allow a little bit more freedom. So traditionally, marketing deadlines, like in our case, you know, we have to get everything done by the end of March so that the brochure can be put together and, you know, cross the T, dot the I's, and there we go, that's the programme. Well, with various localized quarantines in countries or lockdowns, plus Brexit, hurrah, all of that, you know, I can put together the program we want to do by the end of March, but it might not be the program we deliver in July. So I think, you know, there's going to have to be a little bit more sort of flexibility and understanding, and I think the public will understand, because we are going through lots of short-term changes, you know, where one part of the country is in lockdown and we maybe just get a day's notice, etc. You know, so I think there is going to be more uncertainty. I think there is, as I think Maggie was saying, there is going to be more experimentation within the festival programme, and we'll want to frame that carefully so that the audiences know this is something we're going to try. It might not work, but this is how we would like you to come and take part in this experiment. And if it does work, it could be a really exciting way forward for work that we do with you and the festival. So yeah, I think there's going to be collectively a bit more risk and a bit more experimentation.
Great. Okay, we're going to move into the questions from the audience now. We've got quite a number of them. We've got 5 or 6. So I'm keen to try and get somebody to answer all of them because people have put these forward. So the first one is, do you think audiences would be more likely or less likely to engage with festivals post-COVID? And I'm going to ask David this one to start with.
I think there'll be a mix. I think, and we're currently seeing, in society that there's such a gulf of where people are at on what they're comfortable with. We've gone from very tight lockdown, and where Stephen kind of referenced this morning that, was it something like 92% of people were complying with the restrictions, which they thought was incredible that many people were buying into it. We're now in a space where there's a whole load of people that are happy to go to the city, to go to pubs and eat food, to kind of meet up with people and are really comfortable. And then there's still, some of them have been shielding or still just feeling uncomfortable with kind of re-engaging to that level. So I think we will get some returners that come back to your festival because they have that loyalty, they enjoy that experience. There might be some that don't come back initially, but I also think you might get some more audience come that actually they're wanting to engage in a different way. I think people have used, and I know I generalise, but use this period to maybe reflect a little bit on what matters to them. And is it about spending time with family and friends, or is it about exercise, or is it about their well-being? Are they investing more time in things going, actually, I want to do more things that make me happy because I've seen what could be. So I think there will be a mix. It was that thing I talked about earlier about, say, we'll have a volume level that things will spike, and suddenly, so, Amazon orders went through the roof during lockdown. Everybody was kind of running, everybody was kind of baking. You couldn't buy baking equipment, and that will come down. Now, do we retain some of those bakers? Do we retain some of those runners? And I think we'll find the same with our audiences. I think when we start to do things again, I think there'll be a bit of influx because people have missed that and want that connection. And if they feel safe, for me as an audience member myself, I want to feel that the organisers have thought about me as an audience member and to make me feel safe and to visibly show me that you're thinking about it being safe. So that was one of the things that came out yesterday, was show your audience what you're doing, tell them what you're doing, to make them feel really comfortable. And when they can, going from sort of cleaners being hidden and you only see them after, visibly show them that you're cleaning, because actually that builds reassurance. So I think we'll get a sliding scale. So I think we will get a mix of new audience and those returning. And it's just that, how far back do we step? Where we look at it 2 months away, 3 months away, 6, 12, I think it will change as we go along.
Really, really interesting. Okay, next question. It's another anonymous one. Have you seen or experienced, and I would add, have you heard of any guerrilla or seemingly spontaneous performances in the streets of residential neighbourhoods in your communities? Has anybody actually seen any examples of that? You have, Paul? Yeah,
one of my neighbours down there. She's an opera singer. She's a soprano, and every day, she only stopped it about 5-6 weeks ago. Every day at midday, she'd come out and she'd sing. And it was great. And she was featured on the local news, and it was really good. And by the end of it, you had probably 20, 25 people, and it was not always the same people, in the street, socially distant, in the summer, listening to Fabienne sing, and it was good. And I think those parts of where cultural activity has been part of an upsurge in community activity, we need to see the connections between those two things. I think it's up there with people volunteering for mutual aid groups. They're doing their bit for where they live. Maggie, did you say you've seen that as well?
Oh, I've seen loads of examples. Yeah, I mean, my neighbourhood is not so much opera singers and a little bit more. It's a quite a working class area where I live. But there's been loads of beautiful examples, and on some of the networks that I'm part of on social media, there's been lots and lots of sharing of what some street artists have been doing in terms of taking work in into local neighbourhoods and streets. So I think there's hundreds and thousands of examples of all of that across the country. And what's brilliant about it as well is that a lot of it is the artists that are part of the sort of established outdoor arts community are often leading the way and kind of taking some of that work out there, because it's designed to work in this context. So yeah, there's lots of really beautiful examples. And if anyone's interested in looking at what they are, I think there's Facebook groups and kind of social media groups that are really full of them. You should find it quite easily online.
Well, you obviously live in more interesting places than I do. Perhaps I should start doing it. Andrew, you've seen this.
Yeah. Again, like Maggie, we've seen quite a lot of stuff. I've seen some stuff happen locally, actually, just down at the local park with local children's entertainers just do some storytelling to socially distanced crowds who are sitting in the area. The challenge, of course, is to monetize this. How do the artists earn an income? Like when we've got the tradition of the hatters still to this day as part of Hat Fair, international buskers, really brilliant artists, and they earn their fee. We cover the transport, etc., but they earn their fee by donations. So obviously we want to, and I've been looking at this anyway, we now need to fast forward it, move to a contactless system of donating. And it might be that becomes more common now in terms of artists actually earning a fee on the day. I know it's not necessarily ideal in every scenario, but that's going to be the challenge, is how you monetize that so that artists get paid for their work.
And David, you've seen this too, from the sounds of it.
Yeah, like Maggie, there's loads around, and it's interesting seeing some of the artists. So, Kevin Turner, who's one of the joint artistic directors at Company Chameleon, it struck my mind remembering that he did a duet, I think, in his lounge with either his young son or daughter, and just those beautiful moments that actually, you're engaging with that online, and we'd all probably like to be less on Zoom than we are, but that was a moment where that artist creativity, you're probably never going to see that before, and there's something really touching about Kevin kind of working with one of his children that way. And then along to, and the estate I live on, we found out there's a house four doors down where 3 of them live there, and they're all cruise ship singers, and they've been coming out and singing once a week. So I think there's that interesting thing about kind of local communities just being creative, and that needs to be really encouraged. And then it's back to that conversation about, well, how do we monetize that? Where does professionalism come in? Where does the artist fit? What's me participating because I enjoy it? I like baking with my daughters, but I'm not going on MasterChef anytime soon. That's okay. But actually, where do we fit all of that? So I think, there's creativity, I think, along with exercise and mindfulness seem to be, for me, the big things that people have sort of moved towards during COVID to support them through it, and which, has got to be encouraging for us.
Really interesting. There's another anonymous question from an audience member. I think I introduced this term, but Maggie must have picked up on it, which was, somebody said, Maggie used the term radical engagement and radical change. What does that look like in reality? Maggie, do you want to actually answer that one?
I suppose if you know what the radical change is, and if I could articulate it right now, maybe it's not very radical. So I suppose it is, I think part of what I was trying to say was that I do think it's a moment for us to sort of genuinely reflect and look at how we might what is the revolution that we want to cause within our own work, what and how broad can that be, and how much of that is kind of organizational and institutional, and how much of that is actually about the work that we're actually presenting. And I think that's kind of what I mean by radical. I think it's about actually a kind of ruthless examination of how we do things, who is the we that is doing the doing, and what is the achievement that we actually want to create, what is the output that we want to create. So I suppose I mean a kind of a real an opportunity to really examine all of those things and kind of broaden the number of people that are in that conversation, so including looking at who involving the audiences, but also looking at who are those audiences and who are the people that are not in that audience that ought to be. So I suppose I think that it's a time to look at all of that. But there's just one other thing that I do want to say, which was about that conversation about money that we had earlier on, that new forms and new ways of dealing with how we resource these things, that it's a massive issue, and we mustn't hide from that. We mustn't pretend that it's all okay. And if we think that because the cost of putting on these events is high, and it's even higher if we want to keep it free at the point of engagement. So I think we need to be upfront about that. We need to advocate and we need to make sure that we are being very clear with the government that we can do all this amazing work, but we can only do it if we're resourced to do it. And I think that that's something that I really want to make sure that we don't lose sight of, because I am very fearful that this opportunity for radical change and opportunity to take work to all these, you know, in a place-based way, all these wonderful things that we've been talking about, it's only going to be possible if we can, you know, make sure that the value of this work is clearly understood. And everyone knows now, we've seen the government can find that magic money tree when it's needed. And we need to be able to show that this is an area in which it's needed, in which we are able to create moments of profound change that are going to kind of really support and affect communities and have a long-standing impact on the places and in which they live. So yeah, that was what I wanted to add to that point about money. And the audiences have to be part of that conversation too, and tell the organisers and their local authorities and their parliamentarians that they care about it. And we have to help facilitate them to make the case in that way.
Well, thanks, Maggie. Passionate and wise words there. So penultimate question, we've touched on this earlier on. How do you see yourself re-immersing your festivals back into the community with the local audience after having been out of touch for so long? I don't know who wants to answer that. Is that something for you, Andrew?
Well, look, I mean, it's kind of on a personal basis, it's been a bit from, you know, I'm lucky compared to a lot of freelancers in that I've had the 80% furlough, which has kept me going, you know, great, but it's also equally been incredibly frustrating. Because I haven't been able to do what I do officially. So I've actually tried to keep in touch in other ways. Probably the most creative thing I've done during furlough is I've been doing epic walks across the city and taking lots of photographs, and there's beautiful countryside. So the tourist information got onto this, and they've now got vlogs of me doing walks and everything. So it's hey, it could be my alternative career. So I hope I'm keeping in touch with our communities in a different way. And I've still been having conversations with BID and all the rest of it, and with local partners. So I've been doing it informally, but not officially. But it is going to be a challenge if I'm not officially back till November to kind of then jump back in and reignite all those conversations. So I think the key is going to be don't rush it. I'm going back to my own principles. I said earlier, work with small groups. It's almost start again because, hey, the slate's been wiped clean. These are new circumstances, and you know, those partners I worked with 6 months ago, their circumstances have completely changed. So I've got to, you know, go and talk, listen. Don't assume anything. Don't assume things where they were before, and start those relationships almost from scratch again in the sort of the new territory. So that's where I'm going to start from.
That's great, thank you. And final question from the audience, which is, do you think outdoor arts would have to fight for their place now that many other art forms like theatre are taking their work outdoors? And David, you touched on this earlier. Do you want to pick this one up again?
Yeah, and I'm not sure how helpful language is about sort of us fighting other bits of the sector. I think that feels kind of unhelpful, but I think it's more about making our case for what we're good at, why it's important. I think, you know, Maggie's last comment around how we work with those communities, how it is kept free, how we can maintain that access. Us having that conversation is far more important for me with funders and with government than necessarily, well, it shouldn't go there. I think, you know, Helen Marriage's point this morning about, you know, if we've got venues that are going to be closed for quite a long time and they're going to have limited numbers, but outdoor things can happen, festivals can happen, is that a better route? I came through theatre, it was where my training happened, it's my background, so I'm not for 1 minute advocating we close theatres or they stay closed any longer. They need that support. But I think there's something about us making our case about what we actually do and what we can do. I think our sector's been very good at talking to itself, and we've almost been this sort of band of kind of, we'll go and do it our way, and we just get on with it, and we kind of like that feel to it, and everybody knows each other in the UK sector. There's a chance to broaden that and have different conversations with different people. So I don't think it's about fighting our corner, but I do think, as Maggie said, it's about being passionate about the impact we have, but also then going, okay, that's all of that, we can talk about that really clearly. However, 50% of my budget next year is going to need to go on additional stewarding and security. And if I'm going to go and work in this community, we need to kind of bring this additional resource in, and that costs real money. So I think the reality around that is a conversation we do need to have, because the notion is we're often always grateful, aren't we, in our sector, that it's like, oh, it's great we get to do this, and we always find a positive. And sometimes we've got to go, we can do all of that, but actually we're looking at increased costs, we're looking at this being a change period. Where is that money? Does it need to be distributed? But I don't think we should necessarily look and say rob Peter to pay Paul, but it would be interesting to see how we maybe spread that a little differently. And there may be new pots of money. You know, I think mental health and arts is going to be a huge agenda issue. So actually, what projects, artists are great that if you give them a steer and go, I want you to think in this sort of way, or what project could we do that would kind of tie in with this? Localism, well-being, I think those will be factors we will see bubble up. And whereas previous things, maybe big corporate sponsorship for bigger festivals will maybe be not such a big thing. I think other ways we can be resourceful and tap into things and go, we can make that project fit. And that's what producers and programmers and artists do all the time. They take an idea and make it fit. So it's not going to be easy, but I think, you know, there will be ways. But we, as Maggie said, I couldn't back that point any stronger, that we need to make that case.
Thank you, David. So we're going to say goodbye to our panelists shortly, because we're coming to the end of the session. But before we do, I'd just really like to say thank you very much to Andrew Loretto, Maggie Clarke, Paul Bristow and David Edmunds for a kind of stimulating and exciting debate and discussion. And we hope to see you all again soon.
Thanks, Michael.
Pleasure.
Thank you.